was describing in terms of the average student in the ombuds pathway, those were the students who were typically characterized as not being quite ready, right? Their skill level wasn't quite there. So the very first strategy that I used was to help those students adjust their expectations to the dissertation process as opposed to coursework. Coursework is rigid, right? Every week you go in, you do an assignment, you get feedback, you move on to the next thing. There are deadlines, it's set, it's structured. And I don't know about you all, but when I switched from coursework to dissertation back in my day, I had it was a culture shock. I spent like 3 months or something just going, oh my goodness, what do I do now? So part of it is I provide students with a level of structure. I give them templates. And I've noticed that some of you have used some of the templates that I've developed, which is fantastic. I provide them with templates on how to do timelines and updates, things like that. And I also, generally speaking, just talk to them about resetting their expectations a little bit so they can manage their own process and take ownership of it. Okay, so when I do that, what I find is that I separate out the students who are just not getting the kind of guidance they needed from the students whose skill levels were really just not there. There were students who, when the learning contract came into place, they went, oh gosh, I better get some editing help. I better get some, writing help and bring myself up to where I needed to be. Or now I get it. I understand how this process works, and I understand how much I can use my chair for, what I can use my chair for, and so on and so forth. And those students then were able to, get through the process. The ones who I felt like just weren't able to get there regardless, and there's a certain percentage of that because their skill level just wasn't there and they were unable to use the tools that they needed or reset their expectations, were the ones that I knew I couldn't help. Over the last 18 months, there were 2 students that I just couldn't help, one of whom went on to graduate with Tom, who's actually on this call, which is fantastic. I was thrilled when I saw him graduating with another chair because I was like, great, I couldn't help him. I thought his skill set wasn't there. Apparently, it was. I just wasn't able to help him. And the other one, I think, took a certificate and decided to not continue his study. So there's no doubt that there were some students who I felt their writing skills or some other skills, their cognitive critical thinking skills weren't there, or it could just be that I couldn't see it. But the vast majority of these students who had been characterized, right, as having trouble in that area really adjusted once I helped them talk about their expectations and how to manage this process, and really how to reach out for help and use me and use other people as they needed. So part of my toolbox in terms of optimizing my time with the students, whether it was in the grad school, ombuds, or back again, exactly the same. I use lots and lots of templates to help me with repetitive stuff. I use it for tracking. I use it to provide a level of consistency and structure. And I also, my best tool is a Word document, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. It's a very simple Word document that I call best practices because I'm just not creative that way. But and it literally has 8 or 9 pages of the feedback that I repeat to every student, right? How to construct your problem statement, how to do this. And I put it all in one document and I update it on a regular basis, and it goes into their welcome package. And what happens is when I look at their concept paper or whatever, I will just say refer to the best practices on this section for how to rewrite this, or the best practices as examples about how to, and that just saves me so much time. It optimizes my asynchronous time with them. And in terms of doing the synchronous time, even though we are told that there's an expectation of a certain number of hours, when I do my own tracking, very rarely does any one student take more than one of my hours on average, right, in a given week. Very rarely does that happen. Usually it's less than that. So what will happen is when they submit something substantive, that'll take a little bit of time. Or if I have a regular call set up with them, that'll take a little bit of time. But on average, it's far less than an hour per student per week, give or take. So in terms of synchronous time, one of the things that I found really useful was setting up regular calls every month, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, individual calls with especially those students who are feeling marginalized or who are troubled by the process or who are unable to progress, because it allows them a chance to connect and feel connected and gets rid of the isolation that they feel and brings them back into the fold, and it takes away one of the factors that may be hindering their success. So that's a great thing, because when I know that's coming and I have it scheduled in terms of regular calls, it takes away the surprise element in terms of my own workload, right? And it allows me to plan for that, and it allows me to optimize that time where I can just do blocks of time for that. You've all seen, I think many of you have seen the spreadsheet that I use, which I know is really geeky and detailed. But again, my best tools are the most simple things. But I do track and manage my own turnaround times. So on average, I like, and it's always on average. I just got off of 2.5 weeks PTO, and it took me a full week to recover from that. So everything's always on average. But on average, I like to track how long it takes me to get partial drafts back, how long it takes me to get full drafts back, things like that. All of this helps me optimize my time with the student, right, which is at the end of the day. And one of the things that I do now is I track, because we all have a lot of turnover. Students who go out on leave of absence, they go to another chair or whatever. One other mentoring strategy that I used all throughout was I track milestone approvals. So every quarter, right, I count, and I do this on an ongoing basis, but I report it to myself every quarter, how many CP approvals, how many DP approvals, how many DM defenses have I had in that quarter, and how many of my current, I take a snapshot. So currently I have 32 students doing this, 5 students doing that. Next quarter I have 30 students working on this, 7 students working on that, or whatever it is, like their CP, DP, DM, and that allows me to see the progress. So this is a way for me to be proactive about identifying issues where if I'm not seeing over time, right, if I'm not seeing that 37 students start off at a CP stage in April, and by July, if I don't have at least a couple moving on, and by December, if I don't have more moving on, so if by December I'm not seeing, let's say, 30 students moving on to, or 30 students in the CP stage and 7 moving on to DP or whatever, then I know there's a systematic issue there. So these are the tools that I've used to effectively or try and optimize my own mentoring for each of these students. Now I'm talking about it from a workload and chair perspective because next I think we talk about it sort of how to get this specific to the student, but I'm talking about all these strategies from a chair perspective. But I think the key point I want to make is that for me, there was, as somebody who's on the ground and has been doing this for a little while, through all the various iterations, is that I haven't had to modify my tools very much in order to get students to be successful. Key among those tools is understanding that not every student's going to have an A dissertation and not every student's going to complete, but that doesn't mean the vast majority of them can't, right? The more I work to help them adjust their own expectations, the more I'm better at using my tools to optimize how I'm communicating with them, the better I am at tracking my own metrics and tracking my own progress and how these students are moving through, the more successful I am at getting these students through, and no matter what the outside structure is. And it allows me to take ownership of the entire process. In the first iteration of the grad school, it was a little difficult for a chair to take ownership because of various barriers, but those barriers have long since gone. And now it's fantastic because you can take ownership of the student's process and ensure that they're able to, everything other than their own internal skill set and their own internal motivation, is all the other barriers are removed, right? If the chair can do that, then you've got the students who can progressing. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say about this. Mel.
Thank you, Mina. And I'm going to switch to slideshow mode so that we have a prettier view. So thank you, Leah, for that. All right. Now, for those of you who don't know, we have started a pretty cool thing. We're calling them hybrid positions, and these are where some of our graduate school colleagues have actually migrated into the schools to facilitate the applied doctorates within the schools. And so this is a new thing that's just a couple of months old, and both Robin and Jennifer are serving in these hybrid roles. And so I thought it would be helpful for us to learn a little bit about how that fits. And Jennifer has had great success in working with School of Education folks and helping them successfully complete. So Jennifer, will you talk a little bit about your hybrid role and what you do to support your students?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming and listening to us today. I hope that you'll be able to take away some helpful hints from what I have to say. As opposed to what Nina was saying in terms of specific strategies, I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal philosophy in working with students. And also, I come from a student affairs background. My degree's in higher ed administration. And I'm going to talk about how I incorporate that student philosophy into my work. And this is what led me to the hybrid position. But in higher education administration, we talk a lot about upholding the mission and the vision of our institution in order to increase student retention and increase student satisfaction. So I always go back to the mission of NCU, which is to help working adults, working professionals achieve advanced degrees. And I always try to keep that in the forefront of my mind when I'm working with them. So one of the reasons I jumped into this hybrid role is because given my background in education, I'm very passionate about education topics. And I wanted to start as early as possible with students to help them develop the scholar practitioner role of developing formal inquiry to solve real-world problems. And I use the one-on-one mentoring approach that we sell to our students when we get them to come to us. And I try my best to show a commitment to helping them excel by giving them this one-on-one attention. And the research shows in higher education that the more we can engage with our students the earlier on, the more likely that's going to lead to better retention rates. And one theory that I think about a lot is from William Perry, and he's kind of a guru in the field of student affairs, and he talks about his intellectual development theory. It's about +1 staging, how we have to meet students where they're at. And students learn and develop intellectually based on a challenge and a support system. So in an open access institution where students come in with a varied amount of skills, I've really tried to reinforce Perry's motto that students need to not only be challenged, but they need to be supported in where they're at. They need to feel comfortable in their learning environment, especially where they could be isolated working at their kitchen tables late at night. So I tend to take on the role of the philosophy that I want the student to trust me and for the student to have open communication with me. And I really focus on relationship building. And I strive to kind of work with the student to say we have a mutual goal here of a completed dissertation. So how can we come together to accomplish this goal? There's another theorist I just wanted to talk about, Tinto, who's another guru in the field of higher education, and he says the more that students are integrated into the institution, not just the classroom, not just with faculty, but with student affairs people and everyone they meet at the university, the more likely they're going to feel connected to the institution. And the more a student feels that their institution is being loyal to them, the more likely the satisfaction will go up and hence retention. So I try to encourage my students I try to be engaged with my students as much as possible. And in jumping into this hybrid role, I'm excited because I can start working with the students earlier on in the process about developing their topic for their dissertation and helping them to develop the research methodology by which they can accomplish their dissertation goals. And I think of mentoring, as I said, as not just an academic endeavor or supervising. I don't think of myself as just a supervisor of academic work. I think of myself as, I'd like to say, an all-encompassing mentor, one where the student knows that they can confide in me, not just about scholarship, but if they need something personally or they're going through something that they feel comfortable coming to me and telling me so I can help them focus on, overcome anything that they need to focus on their academic work. I also like the philosophy of we the three are better than me, meaning that I think 3 minds are more powerful than 1 mind, and that the committee can help the I'm not an expert in everything, and I really value the talent that we all have, and I appreciate the feedback that I get from my colleagues. So I try to bring in my committee as early as possible. We're a community that works together. We're not just individualized chairs, and the focus that that I think really works is when we put the emphasis on the student.
Wonderful. Thank you,
Okay, that's all I have to
Jennifer.
say.
Thanks. And because what
You're
is
welcome.
good research without theory? Robin has created a beautiful model of situated advising. Robin, will you take us through this model?
Absolutely. Thank you for calling it beautiful, because I am no graphic designer. So my daughter is, but I didn't get her help on this one. One of the things that, as I mentioned earlier, that I have looked at in developing distance learning programs since the late 90s was situated learning that came from the Levin-Wenger theory from the early 90s, of course, which emerged pre-World Wide Web, right? Of course, so in 93 we had the World Wide Web emerge, and since then distance learning folks have incorporated many elements of this in a technology mediated environment in which communities of practice emerged, and those of you familiar with the K-12 literature probably know well how important a community of practice is, and how important non-hierarchical structures are to that world. So as I came into NCU 3.5 years ago, I started looking at what does that mean for dissertation advising, and what kind of community of practice do we have here that of course was evolving. And I remember being on a call probably in year 1 where our dean at that time and assistant dean clearly told us we were not educators, and it was not our job to provide instruction to a dissertation candidate who was struggling with a research skill that they had not developed within their coursework. And I thought, wow, I adamantly and philosophically disagree. Our role, I think, especially in advising dissertation studies, is instructional, but as Jennifer just said, what I'm finding in the current research is that chair agency is probably the leading factor to doctoral attrition today. And chair agency involves that mentoring skill set that a chair has in moving an individual forward in a collegial relationship, not hierarchical. The literature shows that when those kind of relationships are established where a chair or an advisor has a very aggressive research agenda that has nothing to do with the student's dissertation, that students are dropping, especially late stage. And in spite of calls, from the Carnegie Center for Advancement of Teaching and other groups that we need a 21st century model for doctoral dissertation work and doctoral completion, we still have structures in place. On another call I remember early on, and just to clarify sort of foundations here as to where I'm coming from, there was a discussion about research Tier 1 and Tier 2 institutions and the old structure that the Carnegie used to define research institutions. And it, from what I had understood, that we weren't really clear on who NCU was and where it fit within that structure. And I still hear often comments that as if our doctoral program should be compared to what the Carnegie categories now would refer to an HRU, a high research institution. NCU is categorized as a doctoral research university. We are not high, and we are not a very high institution, as many of you have experienced and been part of. Michael Offerman, formerly of Walden, wrote a great article in 2011. Thanks, Cynthia. You know what, I'm going to send those links out too so that everyone can look up North Central on the Carnegie classification, and then you can go out and look at your prior institutions and see where we fit. He wrote a piece about sort of not necessarily chair agency, but about the candidate that we are faced with today in the online doctoral universities, especially looking at the very large systems that our peers are attracting this professional who works a very aggressive professional schedule, and that our program and programs like ours fit within their need, because they would never be able to pursue a brick and mortar setting or finish a doctorate that involved a heavily real-time schedule and an on-site participation. And many of my candidates, I'm sure you've heard this as well, come to our program because we also don't have that even on-site colloquium or residency requirement, that they don't have to travel at all. They can complete the doctorate fully online. So what does that mean for us? In a one-to-one model, in a situated dissertation advising world, our mentoring skill set is priority, because we have a cohort of candidates who come from many diverse settings and have many diverse skill sets, and it is our job then to sort that out, establish the relationship, establish the communication structure that works for them, establish a collegial relationship that is non-hierarchical. On Tuesday, my 50th graduate defended at North Central in my 42nd month here. And the other day, one of my peers referred to me as a mini assembly line. And I know they didn't mean it as pejorative, but I thought, wow, if I felt like that, and my brother runs the largest manufacturing plant in my hometown, a very small town in Iowa, and I talked with him about it, and he even said if his workers went to work every day and felt like they were on an assembly line, they wouldn't feel very good about their job. It is so important for me to have candidate-specific mentoring, meaning I don't decide what my model is. I work within a fluid mentoring process where I have to decide what are the best resources in a customized mode for each candidate. So when I come at their study, it's about their study, not from what's my preference. And that can be so difficult. It is very time-consuming. It is very iterative, because we all know their life challenges change, and oftentimes they're faced with a life obstruction that could cause them to leave. The research also shows that when an advising model is overlain on a candidate that is a barrier to their own internal or intrinsic motivation to succeed, they may drop, and they're more likely to drop. So what I've learned is that it is so important for me to be flexible in that, and that I need to remember every day. And you know, we have this conflict resolution skill set. We also need in that mentoring skill set that when we're faced with conflict, and I'm faced with a very frustrated student who is not moving forward, who has, you know, lost a spouse recently but still wants this doctorate, or my candidate defending, whose father is on life support and they've decided to terminate and has to go through that, but knows her father wanted her to complete this doctorate. If I didn't have the kind of relationships with the candidates to understand the life barriers they're facing, how to help them navigate through, and provide the instructional skills that they need to be able to get through those barriers, I wouldn't have had 50 students defend in 42 months. I use a similar method that Mina does. I track very closely, as well as have numeric expectations that I impose upon myself, because I'm a very self-directed chair. I like to compete with myself and overachieve, and I feel it's very important that in that collegial relationship I have with my candidates, that I'm celebrating their milestones, because I know how defeated I feel if I have established a goal for myself and something interferes with that and I'm not able to achieve that. And of course, I like to overachieve every suspense state that I set. So I think it's really important to have that milestone achievement. Jerome is going to talk through these areas that we found in the white paper that the literature consistently refers to as the elements that are important to this advising model, and helping each one through.
Thanks, Robin. Jerome, it's all you.
Good morning. How are you all today? I am the only male in the sea of all of these females. And when we were discussing doing this, the females just talk, and I was listening and listening. And I said, wait a minute, I got something to say. So I hope that what I have to say here today, it can help someone. I know that all of you all have your way of doing things, and I have my way of doing things, and I'm trying to reach that 50 graduate the way Robin is. One day I will get there. Cynthia Akage and I always talk to each other about when we have problems, or also the good things. And I always say that I'm graduating a student or I'm moving a student because I want to have one up on Melanie Shaw. That's who I try to follow, Melanie Shaw. Now I got to follow Robin. Well, what I'm going to talk to you all today about the situating advising, and I'm going to tell you about me and briefly about me and going through the doctoral program. I went through all the classes through flying colors, and it came to writing my dissertation. Although I was at a traditional university full time, and I was on an assistantship, and the first paper, pre-dissertation paper, something like the concept paper that I turned into my chair at that time, and he wrote all on it in red, and at the end he told me that maybe you need to rethink the doctoral program. Now I could have called him all kind of names and said all kind of things, but I didn't. I looked at his feedback, and I talked to a student who was in the program ahead of me, and she pointed down the hall, and I was wondering why she was pointing down the hall. And what she was trying to tell me is that maybe you need to change chairs. You need to go down to hall. It was another person. And I went down the hall and I talked to them about changing chairs. And he took the time out to help me to revise that paper and to become a better writer. I said that to say that sometimes when you run through a roadblock, maybe the students need to rethink. And I think that's the way I mentor my students, from that vantage point, that everybody has something to contribute. We have to find a way to help them to contribute something. Now, according to research, it lists here several things that mentors should do with mentoring. And the first one it talks about is set mentoring skills. As a chair, we need to set mentoring skills. We need to think about the people that we are working with, and we have 37 students on the average. So in each of the students have individual skills, and some of them work fast, some of them work slow. So we have to find a medium as far as when we have the one-to-one model here at NCU. So we have to find ways to help each individual to make it through the program. And also, the next thing that research shows is that we need to have a healthy relationship, a communication with our students. Now, one thing that I do when I get a new student, whether through a chair change or new to the program, I have a mandatory meeting with the student, and I go from when they're going to submit, how they should submit, what I want, my expectations for the student. I set the groundwork from the beginning as far as what I expect for the student and how I expect it for the student. And one thing that I tell my students is, because you know that what they call it, that chat that students stay on. And I told them that they can read the chat if they want to, but the time that they spend in reading those negative comments, that they can be writing a paragraph. So I talk to my students from time to time about that chat and how the need to, in order for them to stay focused. And another thing that I do as far as in communicating with my students is that I might talk about, I love football, basketball, sports. I might talk about something of that nature, not necessarily something totally about their paper all the time. Like I have one gentleman who went to Penn State, and he's a veteran, and he always talk about Penn State football and things like that. So we might start off the conversation talking about that, and then eventually we will get to what he called me about. And also the next point there talks about how chairs should provide mentoring tailored to the needs of each candidate. And I think I get my mentoring, the way I mentor students from is that my background is education psychology and special education. So for a long time that I've had students who they consider as cannot do who always have problems. So I'm a type person with the very little words, and plus my feedback is a progression type feedback. I do not give most of my candidates a lot of feedback at one time. And I tell them up front that yes, we're going to, and I start off with the problem statement. Yes, we're going to construct this problem statement, and then I put on there, it is okay for now. We will revisit this, so to let them know that we're going to come back and revisit that. And from the beginning, when I start off with the student, I don't worry about format. I have them to start off with a Word document and to get their ideas on paper first. Then I have them to do the problem statement, the purpose, the research questions. Then I have them to go back and do the introduction and the definitions of terms. So when they get those, what I call the foundational elements, then I have them to put it in the template. And that way they won't have to worry about formatting, so that they can't get things in the template. And then we work from there. Also, the next bullet point talks about how chairs should encourage the candidates to set due dates for milestone completions. And I do that by having a conversation with my students at the beginning of each of their classes. I upload their welcome letter, I have their strategies for success document that the former assistant dean, I think someone gave it, and I have them to upload that. And I also have them, I write a statement that in the course room for them to please post a statement in the course room that you have read and understand the welcome letter and the strategies for success document. And they post the statement so that they have read that. Then I come back and have a conversation with them about their timeline. I have them to post the timeline, and then I have a conversation with them as far as what are they going to work on, what are they going to complete for this term, and we go from there. And I try to have them to work, set high expectations for themselves. But I have them to set minimum expectation. In order for you to receive an S in this course, then you must complete this. Then at the end of the course, I come back on the 12th week. We can either communicate by email or for if I'm going to give a U, then I have to talk to the student, and then we assess what has completed at the end of the thing. And also, like you might have heard me say about the 21 days timeline, most of my papers are given back to within 1 week at the most. So I try to give timely feedback to them to help them to move through the process. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Jerome. All right. And now, just quickly, I want to talk a little bit about my process and how I work with my students. And there's a lot of overlap, but I think you'll also hear that we each have our own style in working with our students. So we're certainly not advocating for a standardized process here. In fact, we're saying, you know, bring your own mentoring skill set to the task. So I make a process to go in and check in every single day, and that's even on weekends. And so that means that, you know, 365 days a year I am online, but on the weekends I just spend, you know, maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and I make sure to respond to any student questions, or if there's something brief that they've posted over the weekend, then I'll respond to that. I also, like Mina, I use a tracking spreadsheet, and mine is not nearly as detailed as Mina's. I'm not a fan of big spreadsheets. I'm a fan of very concise spreadsheets. And so I update my spreadsheet each Monday with the progress that the student has made. And then I also have a section where I make notes for myself. For instance, if I've said that the student must complete a concept paper in this particular class, I'll color code that so that I'm reminded to remind the student throughout the course that that's the expectation. I am a big fan of macros, and I have a program called Tag Keys that I use, and I want to say it was $20, but there is a free version as well, but the $20 allowed me to share it across multiple computers. And I save my most commonly cited comments and feedback for students in this tag key system so that I can quickly add a comment, a substantive comment about synthesizing the literature and how I'm not looking for sort of book report, one study after another, but rather citing multiple sources around a particular theme. And so I use that when I'm providing feedback so that I can provide detailed feedback without it taking as much time, especially for those comments that I say over and over and over. Rather than holding office hours or telling students to schedule an appointment with me to talk, I actually have a call me anytime approach. I tell students I'm available anytime they want to talk. And if I miss them, I have them leave me a message and I call them back as quickly as I can. I don't even specify, don't call me in the evenings, don't call me on the weekends. I really do leave it that open. And what I find is that students are incredibly respectful of not overusing that opportunity, and I find that it helps me with my own time management by not having to block out a time to talk to students, but rather just take their calls as they come in. So that's a process that really works well for me. I provide feedback within 48 hours for anything that comes to me, and I can do that because I'm in the class every single day. So I don't have these big backlogs. Mondays tend to be harried for all of us because we have all of our check-ins. So if I get a milestone on Monday, often I'll not get to it until Tuesday or Wednesday, but most of the time throughout the day, I'm actually providing feedback within 24 hours on milestones. This means that Monday's a particularly long day for me, but it helps me manage my time well throughout the week. Another thing that I do, I'm still working with a lot of these at-risk students, as we all are, but some of the Ombud students are still with me, and I find that these students often need some remediation, and so I do encourage my students to get an editor if they have writing challenges, and I tell them up front that I can't serve in that role. I can't get that granular with them because then I lose my effectiveness at looking at, holistically at their work. And so I encourage my students to use that sort of a la carte spa service approach and for them to secure the resources that they need. Often I'll start with the NCU resources. I'll say, have you explored the Academic Success Center? And Grammarly is a great tool that you can use to begin identifying some of these gaps in your writing. But then if the student is not able to overcome that with the tools that we provide, I will say to them that in order for them to be successful, I expect that they're going to have to rely on some additional support in that way. So that's my process in a nutshell, and let's get Mina to talk a little bit more about what she does. She's got the most impressive spreadsheet of all, so Mina.
I'll be really quick here. I actually, the only reason I put some of my stuff up here is to provide a contrast to how some of the other folks work, because as Melanie said, each of us is really different in how we work, and yet we all have the same end goal in sight. I tend to be much more structured. When I have my initial meeting with my students, one of the things I say to them, sort of half jokingly, half not, is I say, I'm married and I like to stay that way, which means I don't work weekends. So I try to be pretty structured when I work. So what I do is I have times that I block off every day for student calls. So anytime a student emails me and says they want to set up a call, I'm able to offer them something very quickly within, a day or so. But because I have those times put aside, very rarely it'll take a couple days. And that allows me then to say, okay, I do this in the mornings, this in the afternoon, and that's just, so 80% of my workday, I sort of have a good idea of how to structure, and the other 20% I leave completely free to react for those extra students or somebody calling me in a panic or whatever, which doesn't mean that I don't encourage them to call. They can call and leave voicemails, but this allows me personally a way to, this is how I find myself most efficient. And then all the repetition in our work that we do, and there's a lot of repetition. I don't use any additional programs. I just have my little Word document in my Excel, but that allows me just to save on the repetition. My target turnaround time is 3 days, and I mean 3 business days usually, for partial drafts, 5 days for full drafts. But right now I'm running about a day, 1 day for partial drafts and about 3 days for full. So this is very much average, right? So if I stay on top of things, then it's easy for me on any given day to just get in and see what's there and react immediately. But like I just said, I came back from 2 weeks or plus of PTO, and I had probably about 15 things that I needed to review. So it took me a full week to catch up. There were 3 full drafts and a bunch of partial drafts. It took me a full week to catch up. So there I was on the, I was on the outer edge of this. So hence the average part. But now I'm top of it again, so every day I just do a little bit. But I'm very careful about setting my limits, only because I know my own weakness, which is that if I don't do that, I'll be working 24/7. I'll have no work-life balance. And one thing I've learned over the years is that I really need that, And I've also learned that if I don't force myself to be organized and catch up on things, things just get really behind, which is really bad. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say about that. Is just to provide a contrast to how Mel does hers. So.
All right, so we really would love to answer any questions that you have, and you can type them out. I'll do my best here to respond to anything in the chat box, or feel free to jump on and unmute yourself, and yeah, let us know what questions you have about what we do or what we've said here today. I see here that Leah does the same as me. I don't prioritize my milestones. I just, or partial reviews versus milestones. I just address them as soon as I come to them in my daily check-ins. And Jerome, would you be willing to share your success guide that you use for the students with the group? If you all will actually, any colleagues who have helped me on the white paper, if you'll send me the tools that you use, I'll construct a big email to send out and share with everybody with our PowerPoint and the white paper and the recording for anyone who's interested.
Yes, I will. It's not mine.
Okay. Well, if it's allowed to be shared, that would be wonderful.
Right. I will.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I see here, Danielle, great job. Thank you, Danielle. This wonderful proposal will strengthen our graduate school community and allow us to better support. Thank you so much, really. We are happy to share what we do and hope that it's helpful. I think the big takeaway is we all do it our own way. And so there's no magic formula, but finding what works for you, I think, is the key. And yeah, any of our little tools that we use that are helpful, we'll be happy to share. Jill says, each Monday about 27 of the 37 students submit something to me for review. Is that number about the same for you guys? Jill, I would say on average, I get about 2 milestones on Monday, about 10 partial check-ins, partial somethings, problem statements, and then the rest are just sort of status updates. So I usually have, but then again, I'm in every day of the week. So if something comes in on a Sunday, I'm looking at it on Sunday often. So I think that probably helps me not have too many things on Monday. Gabrielle says, I like a close relationship with my students and follow the same strategy as Dr. Four, talk to the students rather than sending emails. Yeah. Let's see here. We all have, yeah, similar numbers. Yeah, sometimes, Robin, I do too have, it varies so much. I notice on holiday weekends, my students tend to submit a lot. I can tell that they take those times to really work ahead. So I always kind of dread like Labor Day Monday, right? Because then everybody has something for feedback. And sometimes it bleeds into Tuesday, but yeah. Thank you all so much. I see that we're at the top of the hour. I will hang on and answer any additional questions anyone has, and we'll be happy to share all of these resources in an email. So look for that forthcoming in the next day or so. Sharon asks, what's the average time providing feedback on a document, 10-page, full CP? I would say for a 10-page document, and I don't get a lot of 10-page documents. I try to chunk my stuff. I have my students give me partial things, like I love to look at the problem statement in isolation, then the purpose statement in isolation, then the research question. So I really do have them kind of chunk. So it's rare that I would get a 10-page thing. I probably spend about 15 minutes on a problem statement. And probably, I mean, if it's I think most of our concept papers are about 30 pages, not counting the annotated bibliography, and that probably takes me about an hour. And yes, it does depend largely on the issues. And yes, I find that I really focus a lot on the problem statement. Some of those foundational things are where I really hard target. You can get a lot about the quality of a thing by kind of reading the key pieces in the milestone. And so I know how detailed I'm going to need to be on my feedback based on the quality of the writing often. Yes, Leah says it's how you set it up in the beginning. I mean, I think keeping on top of these reviews is the key to my success. I can't imagine, I mean, even on vacation, I'm checking. So, and that's not healthy. I don't advocate that for anyone, but, but it does help me with my time management. So, yeah. Thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful Friday, and we'll send out the goodies that we like to use to share with you all. And if you think of any other questions after this, don't hesitate to reach out to all of us. Thank you.